Hey everybody! We've been doing a lot of videos about cold hardy citrus and citrus that are hardy outdoors, particularly in zones 7 and 8. Some of course that are more trifoliate hybrids or trifoliate orange itself can be hardy outdoors to even lower zones, as low as a warm zone 5 if you're planting in the correct microclimate. However, one thing we don't discuss as often is how to protect your citrus that aren't necessarily hardy to your zone or that are very marginal. We've maybe mentioned a few times about things, and particularly factors in this field, that make this a very detrimental microclimate and essentially make it colder or harsher for varieties that would normally be hardy to our area. We are now considered Zone 8A, which is actually fairly warm. This used to be considered a Zone 7B, so this is a lot warmer than the Zone 7A that we're used to in New York. However, every now and then, we do still get winters that can dip down into the single digits and kill plants that are otherwise hardy to Zone 8A. In particular, varieties you might be thinking about growing in a climate like this are different types of mandarins, like satsumas, changsha. Maybe you're even considering sudachi, yuzu, or ichang lemon, which so far yuzu and ichang lemon have proved to perform very well out here, even with no protection. However, if you want the best insurance for your plant to survive, there are methods you can apply here, and I would say there are generally 3 of them. So, I set up over here this little display of how I would go about protecting one of our citrus that is more marginal to this area. And now it's also not perfect because one of the variables I am going to discuss is sun exposure. And as you can see, we are in a full open, full sun field here. So it is not the best for avoiding that. However, sun is an important thing, and we can actually start with that. When it comes to protecting your citrus in the winter, protecting them from the full sun is actually crucial. You might think that having them in the sun will keep them warmer and keep them more protected from the cold. But in fact, what it does is by having these plants in the full sun and warming up so much during the day, especially in a climate like ours where we could even see 70-degree days in a break in the winter and then go right back down into the 20s and 30s again, which is not great. But what this can do to varieties that are have weaker dormancies and are prone to waking up sooner is these plants can actually emerge from their winter sleep well before the coast is clear, and then they are way more susceptible to damage. Citrus are only hardy when they're dormant. That goes for even the hardiest trifoliate orange strains and trifoliate orange hybrids. They're only hardy when they're dormant. Now, some of them do still have a particular degree of hardiness, even on their tender growth, more hardy than some normal citrus. However, they are still much, much more vulnerable in this state. So, one thing you can do, of course, is, and this I will get into, this fabric here has a dual purpose. One of them is it does sort of act as a shade cloth. This is helping filter the sun and lessen the degree of sunlight that the plant is receiving, leaving it less prone to waking up early. But of course, another way you can do this, and if you're planting a citrus in ground permanently, you can plant this underneath a large tree. It doesn't even have to be a huge tree, but plant it in an understory condition. Plant it underneath a structure near your house. Plant it somewhere where it's actually partially shaded. Now, this does come at a cost, but hey, you're trying to grow citrus in a zone where it's not supposed to be, so there are trade-offs. It's not going to be perfect, but this is what you have to do if you want to grow certain varieties. So you may not get as much production as heavy flower and fruit set in a partially shaded condition. However, citrus still thrive as understory trees. They do really, really well, and it actually shields them from waking up as early from the winter going into the spring. And I've seen this with other species too. In our area, the native redbuds, I will actually see some waking up and blooming sooner that are in full sun conditions, and the ones that are still in understory conditions will not have woken up yet. So it does buy you some weeks, and that can be very valuable if your area is prone to early frost. So first thing, sun protection. Very, very crucial. And I have discussed the negative effects of it. We did lose our Karaji mandarin, what I believe was partly due to the sun exposure, and other varieties have also cracked a little bit. But you can have bark splitting, where the trunks of these plants, as they're waking up and the sap is flowing and they're waking up prematurely, if it freezes again afterwards, after it's already woken up, that sap in the trunk, in the branches, can then freeze and contract and expand and cause splits and permanent damage to the tree itself, leaving it susceptible to infections or just completely dying depending on the severity of it. So that's another big detriment to the sun exposure. Now, number 2, we have wind protection. So you want sun protection, but you also want ideally wind protection, because I'll tell you from my preliminary tests here, what I'm noticing is some varieties are very wind resistant. Yuzu and Aichang pepita and those pepita type of citrus seem to be more wind resistant than mandarins. So think your Satsumas, Karaji, Shakwasha. Those are not as wind resistant as those citrus are. And even some trifoliate hybrids look a little bit rougher than I would expect because of the wind exposure. Thomasville, which we have over here too, the Thomasville Citrange Quat is an especially hardy citrus variety, but not with full wind exposure. What I'm noticing is it does still have some light damage, and it is showing signs of desiccation because it's losing a lot of its moisture to the wind. So you want that wind protection ideally, which, like we mentioned before, in an understory condition, or if you're planting near a structure, that does serve a dual purpose, and that can help you both protecting from the sun and protecting from the wind. Now, with a frost cloth like this that we have here, like I said, not only does it shade a little bit from the sun, but the crucial thing, it's protecting from the winds. Those leaves and those stems aren't getting the wind exposure directly. It's still able to breathe, but it's not getting desiccated like it would out here. Some people think that these cloths, or if you put, your plants in cages and wrap them with hay and leaves, that's what's going to do the trick to keep them nice and warm. But plants don't generate their own heat. They have to store heat from somewhere, and they have to be insulated and keep whatever heat that they do have. So by wrapping them in a bunch of blankets and leaves and everything, you are effectively insulating whatever heat they do have and helping slow down their loss of heat. However, you aren't generating any heat, and it's most important, you're just protecting it from the elements here. So by wrapping your citrus or placing them in a sheltered location behind a structure, I even think the south-facing wall idea isn't always the greatest idea. I think sometimes you may be better off placing it in a different wall that gets some sun exposure, but not as much, because those south-facing walls can heat up so much and leave your plants prone to waking up early, in which case, if you don't have electricity, if that's not an option for you, you're in trouble. You essentially need access to a heater or string lights or something you can wrap around them quick if your plants start to wake up early. So you want them in a sheltered, shaded area. Now, the last thing you want to protect your citrus from that you're planting outdoors in marginal areas, well, is the cold itself. So I'm going to show you inside here one of the most popular strategies, but I will forewarn you, this doesn't work in every zone, and if you have prolonged freezes for more than a day in your area, this will not be a very effective method. This is a short-term solution. It can still very much make the difference, and some varieties don't necessarily need this. It can just kind of help, but if you're growing more tender stuff, keep in mind this is probably best for like the southeast where we are, where freezes are a lot shorter. But if you are in the northwest or other parts of the country where your freezes last a lot longer than 24 hours sometimes, you may have days or a week where it's below freezing, this is not effective. So I will tell you that the first two will work for you. Those are equally effective, but this last one, not so much. So let's show you guys in here. Again, this is just kind of a mock-up I threw together quick. They actually do make full jackets that you can slide over and pull tight at the bottom. This is just a frost cloth that I cut and clamped over here so that you guys could see it in action. But from what I have heard from other people's experience, Broke Farmer I think mentioned this, these white ones seem to work the best. Whatever material they use seems to be superior to some of the other options out there. But if we look inside here, I have some bamboo stakes holding everything up. Inside here is a Karaji mandarin. Again, regarded as one of the best tasting mandarins, but not particularly hardy outdoors for us here. At least not at this age. It might have to get larger and thicker and maybe high grafted on trifoliate. But you can see inside there, we have it accompanied by a 5-gallon jug of water. Now, ideally, a lot of people will use trash cans full of water or even a 55-gallon drum, because having a large amount of water as a reservoir next to your citrus can really help when those short freezes come by, because that water will release heat as it freezes. So if you get below freezing a certain night, but it is supposed to come back up the next day, this will release enough heat to keep your plant from being damaged, at least in this immediate vicinity here. And then as it heats back up the next day, it will store heat, it will begin to thaw again, and the cycle continues. But basically, the larger water reservoir you have here, the more protection you're offering that tree, and the longer amount of time it'll take to freeze that amount of water. So this 5 gallons may freeze a lot sooner than a 10-gallon or a 25-gallon or again a 55-gallon drum, which is probably the preferred. If you have a 32-gallon trash can or a 55-gallon trash can, that works just as well. But if you have a very large reservoir you can place, this can be an effective strategy in warmer climates. So you see the logic. If it's freezing for a very long time, eventually all that water will be frozen and there will be no more heat left to give. Now there is also talk, and I've thought about this too, if you were to create a saline solution, if you were to mix certain amounts of salt into this water, you could effectively raise or lower the freezing point of the water and manipulate when this begins to release heat. So if you have hardier varieties, you could lower that freeze point, so when it does start to release heat, it's at a lower point and it's giving off heat when that particular plant needs it. So you can fine-tune this approach, but again, I think this is better for an area where we are, and if you're elsewhere in the country, you may have to stick to the other two strategies. So say you're somewhere where it's like a zone 6 or 7, and you're trying to grow some pretty marginal stuff. Mandarins and yuzu, things like that, might just be marginal or probably off the list if you're in a zone 6 for sure. But you can still grow a lot of the better trifoliate hybrids with this type of passive protection. And again, the water may not be enough, but if you have access to electricity and you don't mind, if you don't want to take the passive approach, you can of course grow much higher quality varieties. And at that point, I would steer you towards growing those hardy mandarins, growing the hardy lemons and things of that nature. Even Carolina lime, I think, is a really high quality one to experiment with. And you could grow them just with that little bit of protection from some string lights, and maybe keep the water in there if you want. If it's staying warm enough, it's just a backup in case. But you can grow better varieties if you're willing to protect them with a heat source. But if you're trying to do this super low maintenance, you want to leave it outside and forget about it for the winter, you may be able to get away with this in your zone. And depending on the species you choose, the plant selection, that will also determine your input. Hardier plants will require less input. But a strategy like protecting the plant from the wind and the sun can allow you to get away with really hardy plants even in a zone 5 or 6, where even trifoliate orange starts to become a bit marginal in some areas. That is pretty much the lower limit, being zone 5. But if you can place it in a really good microclimate, that certainly helps your chances with any type of fruit tree that you're dealing with. So I hope that helps you guys. Remember, protect it from the sun, protect it from the wind, and keep it warm. Whatever warmth you have access to, provide it. That could be the earth itself, that could be water. If you have electricity, do what you can to grow what you want to grow. You will be rewarded with really high quality fruit, I assure you. So thank you guys for tuning in as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.